So my name is Alyssa Umars. I'm the Agricultural Programs Coordinator for the Methow Conservancy. We are a nonprofit land trust and environmental education organization whose mission is to inspire people to care for the land of the Methow Valley, land that is part of the traditional homelands of the Okanogan, Methow, and Colville people. I'm super excited to introduce you to Amelia Marchand this evening. Some of you may recall that Amelia was going to speak at December's public meeting on the draft Community Climate Action Plan, but because of some internet issues, we weren't able to hear from her. Amelia is a citizen of the Colville Confederated Tribes, and her lineage includes Okanogan, Lakes, Moses Columbia, Palus, and Chief Joseph Band of Nez Perce. In her professional career, she has been the first woman to serve in 4 government positions within her tribe. She holds a BA in anthropology and a master's in environmental law and policy, and she is the program director for the Colville Tribes Environmental Trust Department. She also serves as a board member for numerous organizations, including the Women in Conservation Leadership Advisory Council for the National Wildlife Federation, the Nez Perce Wallowa Homeland, an organization dedicated to preserving the culture and history of the Nez Perce and other cultures in the Wallowa country, Conservation Northwest, the Center for World Indigenous Studies, and Hearts Gathered, a language immersion Montessori school in Omak for the next generation of Okanogan Salish speakers. And in her spare time, Amelia is an advocate for climate resilience. She spearheaded a recent effort in collaboration with the University of Washington's Climate Impacts Group to conduct a climate and vulnerability assessment of 72 bird, mammal, reptile, amphibian, fish, mollusk, plant, and mushroom species of key importance to the Colville Confederated Tribes. The assessment integrated both Western science and Indigenous knowledge of tribal elders. They found nearly 40% of those species to be highly vulnerable to climate change. And tonight you are going to learn from Amelia about the tribe's action plan for climate resilience. But I think you are also going to be challenged to think outside the usual framework of climate change. What inspires me most about Amelia's work is the way that she frames the problem and the solution. She grounds her work in relationships, in the relationships among people, whether those people are feathered, furried, or finned. I also understand that she has an intense dislike for the term natural resource. The land and our plant and animal neighbors are not simply resources to be extracted, and the language we persist in using has a meaningful impact on those relationships.
No, wait.
Before I turn it over to Amelia, I want to make one organizational plug. This month, the Methow Conservancy is hosting our annual conservation course. It begins next Monday evening and will take place every Monday evening for the rest of March from 7 p.m. to 8:15. We will be exploring the all too often overlooked contributions of underrepresented peoples and communities to conservation, sustainable agriculture, and the outdoor and environmental movements. Staff at the Methow Conservancy have spent the last year learning, listening, and reflecting on privilege, race, and racism in our work and in the conservation movement. And we'd like to invite you to join us as we continue to learn and explore how we can all be creating safe, welcoming spaces, and also honoring and highlighting the incredible work of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in our region who are creating a bright future for all of us. It is my hope that after hearing from Amelia, you will be inspired to want to learn more and to take the course. There is still time to register, and you can do so by visiting the events page on the Methow Conservancy website. Registration fees for this course are being passed on to our speakers and also to an organization that they care about. This is not something that we normally do, but we want to honor the willingness of our speakers to share their knowledge and lived experiences with us. We are also doing that tonight, and we'll be donating to Hearts Gathered, where Amelia volunteers on the board of directors. Hearts Gathered is a Montessori school in Omak dedicated to teaching students native language proficiency and to providing an education that is grounded in the rich cultural heritage of the Colville tribes. So thank you for joining us tonight. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amelia.
White, Lim Lim, Katsiaria, Alyssa, thank you so much. In Chai Squeezecum Knox, White, it's so intimidating to see all your little faces on like postage stamps, but it's also so great to be here. Thank you for inviting me and for everyone that came to hang out in yet another Zoom at 7 o'clock at night. So I've got my tea. I hope you each have a snack or a beverage. Cheers. Yes, we're all going to be doing that together. So I'm going to get ready and try to share my screen. So please bear with me for a moment. I literally wasn't nervous until about 2 minutes ago. So I apologize. I think you can see part of my screen, but I don't think it's correct. Let me work on that again. And I'm sorry that you have to watch my face be confused about things. Sometimes that's just how it is. So I was really happy and excited to be able to give this presentation to everyone to talk about climate change. And that seems like a weird thing to be excited about. But that's one of many things that I have to deal with in my line of work. And it just so happens that I feel a little bit more comfortable with rolling this plan out. So I'm wondering, Alyssa, so on my screen, I can see my slideshow, but I can also see people on a sidebar. Is that visible to everyone else?
We see you on the side, and then we see your presentation. It looks perfect.
Oh, okay. So I can't see, or I mean, you can't see the other people that I see, but we're seeing something that's the same. I'm glad we're all on the same page. Glad we're all on the same Zoom page. Okay. I just I wanted to make sure that like the part of the margin of my screen wasn't being adversely impacted. So
no, I think you're great.
Okay. Thank you. So the name of this kind of a plan is NAQS. And NAQS is derived from the word one. And Alyssa guessed this previously, and I know it was driving her up the wall. But in the Insulchin, Nimuputimski, and in Hampchin languages of the Colville tribes, the word number, the number one, is NAQS in each of those languages. And so this is one action plan. Additionally, in English, the 4 letters NAQS are also an abbreviation here for nature, abundance, quality, and sustainability. So this cute, fun little title was actually developed by the Colville Tribes Fish and Wildlife Deputy Director, Jeanette Finley, and I, 2 summers ago, we went to like a tribal climate workshop, and that was the best way to try to combine everything together, because for so many reasons, climate change gets kind of pigeonholed into, oh, it's only creating fires and causing smoke, or it's only impacting salmon or aquatic species because of the blob off the coast. But really, everything is integrated. And so our attempt to try to capture that is NAQS. So I just wanted to share that quickly. In the late 1990s, the Colville Business Council, our tribal governing body, passed Resolution 1996-23, and a copy of it is shown here. It's known as the Holistic Goal. It was developed after extensive community survey and multiple public meetings, and initiated the development and integration of a natural resource specific management plan into one integrated resource management plan. And I'm going to apologize right now because there's several different acronyms that I'm going to throw out, and I'm sorry. So IRMP is the first one, and it's Integrated Resource Management Plan. So the IRMP is a document that was required under the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA. There's your second one. There'll be a quiz later. And it was to be completed by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, BIA, that's your third one, for their Forest Management Environmental Impact Statement, EIS. See, I'm sorry I had to throw all of them at you guys. So, the Bureau of Indian Affairs is a federal entity within the Department of the Interior. And the BIA manages the trust property on all federally recognized Indian reservations. And the Colville Reservation is one of those, which has lots of land, lots of trust property. So that's why it was necessary for this to go through the NEPA process. The IRMP developed goals and objectives for multiple uses of the Colville Reservation's forest, rangelands, water resources, and included economic enterprises to support the tribal government's functions. For those reasons, the holistic goal identifies values for reservation residents' quality of life, diverse economic opportunities, and the natural environment, which do not compromise our traditional foods and medicines, our languages, our cultural practices, or our tribal sovereignty. So it's important to note that in the 1990s and early 2000s, then as now, there was considerable planning and management focused on the protection of NTT, which is salmon, and Quechinum, which is deer, and other, I guess I'll say animal-based proteins. And there's a whole history about that type of conservation and protection, which can be interpreted as very Western and male-based. Hunting is like a male activity, and fishing is like a male activity. And so protection of NTTs from Quechinum has always been a part of our management plans. But as well, as many of us know, traditional foods and medicines of indigenous peoples weren't just the proteins, and protein comes from other sources as well, but they included a variety of plants. And a few of the most common are shown in this image next to the holistic goal. So this is just a handful of the culturally significant plant species that not just the Colville Confederated Tribes, but many, many tribes in our region care about, have significant cultural values to support. And all these words here are in the Insultine language, which is an interior Salish language. So you have the white on the top is called Spetlum. Next to it is Siak, serviceberry. Oh, Spetlum is bitterroot, sorry. And then in the second row, in the middle there is Quinquinum, Indian potato. And next to that is Chochalusa. Down on the bottom left, Itwa. Chochalusa and Itwa are camas, different types of camas. And then in the bottom middle, we have Squequinum, Indian carrot, Squequum, sorry. And then Staheshk on the bottom right is huckleberry. So beginning around 2013, the Colville Tribes Natural Resource Interdisciplinary Team took up the task to revise and update that first IRMP, which created the holistic goal, with a new one. And this was necessary because the BIA needed to submit an updated forest management plan for their federal environmental compliance. BIA, NEPA, there you go again. So let me try to go to the next slide. I was afraid it wouldn't work, so I'm so pleased that we've made it to the third slide. Thanks for hanging in there, everybody. As the former IRMP came to a close and the transition and research and groundwork for the new IRMP began, there was a series of natural events that quickly informed us that the livelihoods and lifestyles of our rural reservation community were impacted by severe and abrupt changes in the natural environment that we couldn't articulate or plan for in an IRMP. So some of these might look a little familiar to my friends and relatives on this Zoom meeting. Windstorms, drought, dust storms, threats of virus, those were different from the threats of wildland fire that we were accustomed to. For example, the damage and closure of infrastructure from windstorms, dust storms, and air quality, we can kind of anticipate them, and we can identify a process for repairing those damages. But there were other changes that we were experiencing that were much more difficult to try to, I guess, quantify. For example, how could we explain the social and cultural impacts of salmon dying in heated waters or sturgeon dying in heated waters? How could we harvest and cultivate traditional foods and medicines when mosquito bites could be lethal? And who would even focus within our tribal government on trying to address those issues. We didn't know. Which brings me to my next slide. So after several years of work, the IRMP team completed a second iteration process in 2015. And the hyperlink to it is included on this page, and it might be landing in the chat box soon. So if you want to take a look at it, you can go ahead and do that. There's other associated documents on that web page too. And those, like the forest management plan, might be on there, and some others. But at the time of the IRMP's completion, it became clear to the resource staff that we didn't have the means to gauge or plan for impacts to our environment, those climate impacts to our IRMP. And one thing that is very important to recognize is that the IRMP is one document that's focused solely on the Natural Resources Division of the Colville Tribe. And in this chart, the Natural Resources Division is shown in kind of the yellowy, greenish transition color. And if you can read the text on the screen, which I hope you can, you'll note that there is not one program within the tribal organization that's identified as a climate office or a climate entity. But if you think back to the devastating wildfires of 2015, there's not one program that has remained unaffected by climate change. And so for folks that are not entirely familiar with the tribal government structure, we are a government just like the state government, just like the federal government, just like the local government. We are just organized differently. And this chart shows, I hope, shows some of that. And every aspect of our government response to emergencies and things like that comes up with who's in charge. So for future reference, might be important to know. Oh. See if I can get it to go to my next slide. I don't think it wants to transition. Did it transition for you guys?
Not yet.
Great. We were doing so well. Let me stop it and start it again, and I'll keep it forward to this one and see if maybe that makes a difference. Okay. I'm so sorry, you guys. Bear with me. And I'm sorry if I have a weird, confused look on my face. That's just the way my face is, though. Okay. I'm going to try this again. Can you see that slide? Oh,
not quite yet.
Exactly.
Oh,
Okay.
yep, we see it.
Doesn't want to go past it. Hope it didn't think it was too boring.
We're still stuck on that one.
What is the deal here? Let me try it again. I'm so sorry, you guys.
Oh, you're fine. I think that when you were sharing it, not in the presentation view that first time before you shared it, we could see the whole thing.
Yeah. let me toggle back. Can you see that now? That screen, at least?
Yes.
Okay. But you can, let me see.
We can also see the upcoming slides.
This is the one that was next, so I'm hoping this will suffice. I'm so sorry for the technical.
It looks good.
The technical resilience we're experiencing, we are adaptable. That's on the plus side. So, okay, where was I? Physical drivers report. So, after the IRMP process ended in 2015, that was when our climate work picked up. Well, I'll just let that go. So, under a BIA tribal resilience grant that the tribe's Fish and Wildlife Department had obtained, a small group, and when I say small, I mean like there was 4 of us, a small group of natural resource professionals worked with the University of Washington, UW Climate Impacts Group, CIG, to develop this physical drivers report in 2017. And the study area that we identified includes all of our traditional territories. So that means portions of the Okanogan Highlands and southern BC, Okanogan Highlands, the Columbia Basin and the Plateau region, and the Blue Mountains in northeastern Oregon were included in the Colville Tribe study area. And I'll show a map of that in a minute. But first, I also wanted to let you know that the hyperlink to the physical drivers report should be landing in the chat box soon. And folks can go ahead and check that out. Depends on how much technical reading you like to do. But the physical drivers report used several models, the best available science at the time in 2017, to identify what types of changes we would be seeing in like ambient air temperature, precipitation, snowpack, stream flows, and also stream temperatures. So the ask that we had for UW to investigate all of our traditional territories as a study area was a pretty big ask. And it wasn't a really easy decision to make for us. So this is our traditional territory. One thing that I did not discuss at the beginning of the presentation is the Colville Confederated Tribes is a confederacy of 12 different tribes. Traditionally speaking 3 different languages. And we became a confederacy not because we wanted to join hands and be friends and allies. It was by design, by the colonizers. And so this has been part of the history that I have inherited, the legacy that I have inherited in the diversity of my family history, is because all of these diverse tribal people, indigenous people, are placed on one reservation now. So the interest that we have in traditional territories is pretty diverse. And if you can Can you see my little arrow, my cursor?
Yeah.
Okay. So today the reservation is right here, right? So this is the Columbia River coming down from Canada. There it goes. And like Omak is over here-ish. And then the North Half area is up in here. Okay, so this, where my cursor is like the middle of that tiny area that is now the Colville Reservation. So our homelands were place-based. They were place-based. But today you can recognize that our homelands have really been carved up by multiple local, state, and international jurisdictions, and federal jurisdictions too, if you think of the national forests and all sorts of other federal lands in our area. An important lesson that Indigenous peoples have learned is that when access and availability of our food system has been depleted, then our health, our quality of life, cultural practices, economy, and independence can quickly follow. So the natural resource staff leading this charge for climate work acknowledged this. And so it was imperative that we understood how all of these traditional territories, even those shared use areas that we have with surrounding tribes and First Nations, would be impacted by climate change. Because the ecology of the lands and waters that have sustained us for time immemorial is what we needed to address. So that's the study area. And with the completion of the physical driver's report, we then had an idea of what was in our forecast for the next 50 to 100 years for all of those lands that we identified. The next step was identifying specific species to find out how that future forecast would impact them. So this is our vulnerability assessment cover page. And this was a report that came out in 2018. And I'm hoping that hyperlinks will also show up in the chat box soon. I wish I could have made that smaller, but that wasn't my decision to make it the most complex type of hyperlink available. Sorry for that. So composing the list of species was, I feel, one of the hardest things that we had to do for this process, since funding could only cover a limited amount of them. We had to ask internally, we had to ask ourselves in our meetings, are we going to spend money to do an assessment for commercial species when the state or the federal government has already done an assessment for those species in our region? Should invasive species, which threaten native species, be identified? Should we, put funding towards that? And it's a rabbit hole of trying to justify one over the other. And if you think back to the holistic goal slide and that handful of traditional, the picture of different plants, one of the things that we needed, a void that needed to be filled, was we needed to identify how some of those very significant cultural species of plants that are important to tribal people, but not important to Western or mainstream or Washingtonians, maybe, how are those going to be impacted? Because generally, if a species already has commercial value, somebody's already done an assessment for it, and we knew that. But species that maybe not be threatened or endangered, but are still vital, it shouldn't be a gray area, but it is a gray area. So we had many discussions trying to integrate traditional plants and medicines into this species list. And it was really, really hard. Probably the best correlation that I can make is to say, imagine you're Noah and you have an ark and there's a flood coming. What are you going to save? That's the best way I can explain what it was like for us to sit and try to decide what cultural plants, what medicine plants to evaluate. It was really, really hard. Thinking about it still makes me upset, clearly, so sorry. But ultimately, our group identified birds, mammals, reptiles, and amphibians, fish, mollusks, I think one mollusk, several cultural plants, and one mushroom for a total of 61 species. And then using this vulnerability index, the climate impacts group analyzed the species and assigned sensitivity scores to identify how each species was going to be impacted by those changes in precipitation, in temperature, snowpack impacts, stream temperature, and that's the most condensed version that I can explain. But if you want to look at the assessment, check out that ridiculous web hyperlink. So, part of this exercise was also the species vulnerability ranking. So I'm not entirely sure how clear or foggy this page is for you guys, but all species, let me back up. There was actually more than 61 species that we wanted to be analyzed. Well, clearly, there were tons of species we wanted to be analyzed, but we couldn't fund it, right? So the ones that we could fund to get analyzed was actually, I think, 72. But because Western science didn't have any prior research or data, GIS points, monitoring, PhD papers written or whatever, because they didn't have data on 11 of those species, they couldn't do a vulnerability ranking for some of them. So that's why all species was 61 only. And that's another short version of how that happened. So there were 11 mammals that were able to get a vulnerability ranking, 19 fish species, 22 plant species, 3 reptiles or amphibians, and 6 birds. And I selected this one page out of that report to show, because you can clearly see that reptiles and amphibians, I mean, there was only 3 that made it to this level of review, but it's not looking good for reptiles and amphibians. Quickly followed by, it's not really looking good for fish. And that's really difficult to think about. But we have to think about those difficult things. So that is the vulnerability ranking. So also, as part of that process, we developed an 8-page climate change brochure for our communities, identifying why climate change is significant to the Colville tribes and describing the changes in everything that I mentioned before: temperature, precipitation, snowpack, streams, and rivers even, that we can expect to see. The brochure also described how those changes will impact things that we're a little bit more familiar with, like wildfires and floods and landslides. And we describe how the changes will impact plants and animals, and gave examples in the brochure of what impact might be expected for significant species like chinook, tackleberries, elk. And then the last part of the brochure was a section on what community residents can do and why the study was undertaken. And I chose this little screenshot of the brochure because it was like 8 pages, but because one of the things that we recommended was some citizen scientists different opportunities. And there's so many available. It was hard to pick which ones to identify. And that's where we landed on those ones. So the brochure, I believe, is also at one of those previous hyperlinks as well. And then it's at this hyperlink. Sorry, guys. So I'm not sure, Alyssa, if you can copy and paste that little hyperlink into the chat box for folks too, but this should be where the brochure and then the use template and the teaching guide are. So
Daniel's been putting all of those links in the chat box.
Thank you so much. It just has like an activity that teachers could do, and I forget the actual age group for it, but hopefully folks are using it and applying it. I think my slide does not want to progress again. Let me try my handy dandy trick from before. How are we on time, Alyssa?
It is 7:45. So 15, 20 minutes.
Perfect. Sorry, pulling up my slide again. I'm so sorry, you guys. Crazy. I wonder, it must just get tired. I think a PowerPoint must be tired because it's almost 8 o'clock. So that explains it completely. So earlier, I think in the interview, or not interview, this is like an interview. In the opening, Alyssa had mentioned how I try to see things in relationships, and this is my relationship map for everybody to have their eyes go glazed over on. So, Environmental Trust, my department, has really been trying to raise awareness about the physical drivers report and the vulnerability assessment, and we've identified some needs, which I'll get to in a little bit here. But one of the things that's important for us to consider is if we're moving forward with a NAQS action plan, with one action plan, it has to include in a holistic manner, in an integrated and adaptive fashion, all these other existing plans. So we have, in 2014, for example, there was a health needs assessment done on the Colville Reservation, identifying so many health disparities that we as reservation residents and Colville Tribal members experience. In 2015, Environmental Trust completed a consumption and resource use survey of the Upper Columbia River, which basically identified reservation residents and where they obtained their food from, where they were procuring food from. Was it from the grocery store? Okay, great. What store did you shop at? Oh, did you go hunting and that's where you got your meat? Okay, did you go fishing? Was it ice fishing or was it out on Lake Roosevelt? Did you go out and gather in the springtime? What roots did you gather? And that informed us as to regions of the reservation that are really important as food sources, food source locations. So that's a really important plan to take into consideration here as well. Sorry, it wasn't a plan, it was a survey. Additionally, in 2018, there was a multi-hazard mitigation plan that our public safety division completed. Followed up within 2016, a hazard identification and vulnerability assessment. Those are under FEMA. They want organizations, governments, local, state, regional, to have those types of plans in case of what unfortunately we're experiencing now with the pandemic, things like that. So all of those things need to be taken into consideration with climate, because can all happen at once. So a couple things that Environmental Trust has done, we've partnered with our Fish and Wildlife Department and our Public Safety Division to really try and further this work together. So it's not just one organization focusing in a silo. We're really trying to have a more broad reach, a more broad perspective, so that we can see, I guess, all those integrated pieces, how they fit together. So for example, we've actually worked on integrating climate change scenarios into our 2020 multi-hazard mitigation plan, whereas in the previous one, I think it was from 2017 or 2018, there wasn't all those new, all the information from our physical drivers report that talked about the wild increases in temperature. We got to incorporate those into our newest multi-hazard mitigation plan. So that's not just to the benefit of our natural resources, but it's to the benefit of our planning and management of our infrastructure, communication system, transportation system, building development processes. So also in 2020, Environmental Trust Air Quality Program received a newly awarded grant to work closely with the regional governmental and NGO partners to coordinate some scientific, health, and wildfire data to identify socio-cultural, economic, and health impacts and opportunities as a result of the extended smoke seasons that we experience. Anybody, well, I'm sure everybody participating in this meeting is familiar with how prolonged our smoke seasons are getting. And it has not just impacts to our health, but impacts to, and not just impacts to our environment, but into how we interact. You know, schools being closed, outdoor sports being canceled. So I don't have to, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir about that, so I don't think I need to explain it too much. But we also have identified some challenges and some needs. So ultimately, the first challenge that everyone has been dealing with is COVID-19, right? That has slowed a lot of our work down, and changes in staff has as well. But we can be adaptable because we have to be adaptable. We have to be adaptable to climate change. So we have to be adaptable in these processes too. And one of the challenges that we've also identified is, for example, the Fish and Wildlife Department and the Environmental Trust Department and the Public Safety Division, we don't manage the tribe's overall website. So when pages are moved around or links are changed, there's been issues with that. And so I tried to go through and make sure that all the hyperlinks that I did share for this presentation are current and active, because I've been tricked before, but they should all be working. Additionally, one of the challenges that we have is with our, not just planning new projects, but seasonal impacts from transportation and then like different land use and development. And a good example of that is right now, the temperatures this week are going to be unseasonably high. And that means, I was just having a call yesterday with one of my coworkers, because on the reservation here, Environmental Trust manages 2 Bureau of Indian Affairs dams. The tribe didn't build them. Environmental Trust didn't build them. The BIA built them. And they've been here so long on these 2 different lakes that we've had to adapt. We've had to adapt to that. And the systems, the flood control systems, are things that we have to be responsible for now. And with this spring breakup and the spring melt, I have staff monitoring both of those dams every day to make sure that it's safe for downstream residents. So, and transportation systems, which could be impacted. Additionally, we've got one of the needs that we have is a pollinator impact study. If you think back to the 61 species that I discussed earlier on, none of those were insect pollinator species. And in terms of the traditional plants that need pollinators, we don't know that specifically, and we need to have that identified. Also, a drought plan. Right now, we don't have a current drought plan. We're working towards obtaining one and doing all of the groundwork for that, but it's still going to take some time to get there. And additionally, I started off talking about our food system and the significance of our cultural foods. And then just a slide ago, I also talked about the health needs assessment that happened in 2014. Reservation residents, like a lot of communities that have social disparities or economic disparities, we are a food desert. There's not enough grocery stores that provide fresh produce and fresh food on the reservation. We have a food distribution program that has been vital, so vital to our residents during the COVID pandemic. And the unfortunate example, the unfortunate experience that we've all had of living through this pandemic has also showed us the vulnerabilities in the national food system. So that's why also completing a community food assessment is vitally important, not just for our health, but for our future. I'm going to try to go to the next slide because I'm almost done, but it doesn't want to do it. Let me do my trick again. I'm sorry. I hope you guys are still there.
We're still here. Great, thank you.
I was like, am I talking to myself? Someone just said, we're still here. I love it. It's getting late. Time for milk and cookies. Okay. And can you see that screen?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. So feel like I've been talking so much. Okay. Environmental Trust has really been supportive of trying to collaborate with partners in our region to protect key landscapes, not just on the reservation, but off of the reservation in our traditional territories. And it's not just Environmental Trust. I can't speak for all the other tribal departments. And I wish I would have coordinated better to have Jeanette participate in this as well, in this presentation. But just speaking for Environmental Trust, we really tried to engage with the Cascadia Partner Forum, Camas to Condors Partners, which is down in the Oregon portion of the tribe's traditional territory, where the Chief Joseph Band of Perce and Palus are and have heritage and legacy and family. Also, the Kootenai Native Plant Society, which is up across the line in BC. And even we've tried to partner to do different activities with like the University of Idaho to support pollinator habitat and subsistence foods and medicines. Sometimes it's through like grant applications, and sometimes we don't get those grants. So, but there's so many other things we're trying to do. As a quick example, I think I can talk about this. we are planning a potential partnership with the Soap Lake Conservancy, which is a nonprofit conservation organization in the Ephrata Soap Lake region. And I think that's all I can say about that. So there's a lot of desire to do this type of work, but we don't have a lot of capacity. We don't have a lot of funding. I like to say Environmental Trust is small but mighty, because we do a lot of great restoration work on the reservation, and we're only a staff of like 13. So as soon as we can hire a climate specialist, these are some of the things that's going to be in their job description. And because we really want to focus this energy and work and help to not just support environmental trust only, but the other programs and departments that we can work and collaborate with. I'm not sure if folks are familiar with the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians, but they are they're a regional tribal NGO that full of all the tribes basically in Washington, Idaho, Oregon, Alaska tribes, and more recently 4 climate change initiatives, and been including more and more First Nations folks as well. Because the only thing that's different between us and First Nations is an invisible line that somebody created and made it up. Everything else is so similar. So I feel like there's a lot that I left out, but should we do some questions? I think that's my last slide. That was my last slide.
Thank you, Amelia. That was wonderful.
I don't know about that, but thanks.
Do you want to maybe turn off your screen sharing so you can see sort of more of the gallery view of folks and
Sure.
some of their questions?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Ted Wagner, and I learned a lot from your talk, and I learned a lot about your effort. And I just wondered, how many counties in Washington do you share land with? In other words, you have Okanogan County and Ferry County and all those counties. So are you part of, how many counties are involved?
Sure, thank you. So the Colville Reservation includes portions of Ferry County and Okanogan County, as you said. We do have off-reservation lands throughout Washington state, which are identified as tribal trust tracts. And some of those lands are in the Methow area. Some are up north of the reservation. There's that strip between the reservation and the Canadian border. Some are there. Others, of course, that's still like Okanogan and Perce County, but others are down in the Wenatchee and Chelan areas as well, the Moses Lake area. So there's several other counties that we, the tribes, have an interest in terms of cultural resources, water quality, habitat protection. And I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. Are those counties in any way united in supporting your effort?
You know, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know.
Amelia, we've got 2 questions that I see in the chat box. Actually 3 now. The first one was a while back. Pat Hegland asked if you use the open standards process to develop your plans. I'm not totally sure what he means by that. And then someone else asked to, I think, just what TEAC stands for.
So the first question was about open standards. Right.
Yeah, Pat Hegland, I don't know if you're still on, if you want to ask that question. Okay, maybe not. And then I think someone was just wondering what TEK stands for.
Sure. I don't know what the open standards is, so I'm sorry to kind of glaze over that one. But TEK stands for Traditional Ecological Knowledge, and I didn't even realize I don't think I talked about it during the presentation. But as part of the vulnerability assessment, we also did a survey, a TEK, Traditional Ecological Knowledge survey, and interviewed several tribal elders, community residents, about all sorts of fun environmental things. About different plants and animals and fish runs and weather patterns and weather events. And the reason was to try to identify, using that generation's wisdom, literally, their wisdom, their knowledge and life experiences, and those of their parents and grandparents that they had learned, to identify changes in climate. So that can, on one hand, it could be identified as kind of like an oral history type of process, but because it's much more focused on environmental change, ecological change, and adaptation over a long period of time in one place, that's kind of the difference and why it's unique and important for tribal people, indigenous peoples, First Nations to know that information, because it's a different type of science. It's not Western science. It's the science. So if you think about, I'm not doing a good job of explaining this, but if you think about someone that has their PhD in soil science, and they have done a dissertation, and maybe it took, 6-7 years. and then they go to one place and they study and work there for the rest of their career. Maybe that's 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years. And they have lots of information and knowledge about that one place or that one aspect of soil science. But indigenous ways of knowing in TEK it's that over thousands of years in one place. And how that one component is being impacted and altered and changed by everything else in its environment. So instead of one thread, it's a blanket that's been woven together, or a basket that's been created to carry all this knowledge and pass it on to the next person. So there's many examples of TEK. The one book I need right now is not on the shelf behind me. It's downstairs in my bedroom. But the one book that I would show you is actually a book of an indigenous, regenerative farming. It's been around for centuries in all sorts of other communities. Adapting your built structures and to work with the environment. That's another way. And there's so many examples. I'm not doing a great job right now because it's my bedtime. But I hope that was I tried.
Are you game for a couple more questions?
I am. Let me take a sip of my tea.
There was a question in the chat if you could elaborate a little bit and explain what a tribal trust is. You had mentioned that there were some tribal trust tracks in the Met How, and I think folks might not know what that is.
Sure. So that is a history of federal Indian law that we don't have enough time for. But I will tell you that if you think of a national park or a national forest, you can go camp, hike, kayak, recreate in that location. That location is federally managed by the federal government. And it's held for the public trust so that all Americans and others can go to that place and enjoy that land. So what was done with creating federal reservations was to say to tribal government, here is land for you. No one will ever come and bother you again. This is the total Cliff Notes version. I hope there's not an Indian law attorney on here because they're going to be mad at me. Because I know this isn't big. This is just Cliff Notes. So here's this land for your exclusive use from now to eternity. The other book that I need to show you is downstairs. Until the grass will always grow. The water will always flow. And that land, because the federal government, in their wisdom, and I say that not in the best way, but did not believe that tribal people, indigenous people, could manage their own land, even though they've done it for millenniums. They said, we will hold this land in trust for you. So it's not a public trust, it's a tribal trust, only for that tribe. Your use, your enjoyment. You are to use that land. It's not for the rest of the public, it's only for you. And then the Dawes Act happened, but we can talk about that some other time.
Okay, one more question, and then I think we should let you go. Joe Walker asked, are there any current projects or venues for non-tribal members to offer support or help contribute to your ongoing projects? Thank you.
That would be great. Call me. Email me. Let's figure something out.
There was someone who had asked for your email. I don't know if you want to share that, or we can figure that out, or we can just tell us how you would like to direct folks.
Yeah, we can. Well, we can put it in the chat box or whatever. That's fine with me. So because of the pandemic, we've mostly been teleworking. Like that's why I'm here in my crazy messy office. And we have, so I've only been the program director for environmental trust for like the past couple years. And before that, we didn't have volunteers doing things. And we also didn't have a lot or any like graduate students to help support the work that we were trying to do, but also to help support them get their graduate degrees. So that is something that I've slowly been trying to encourage more and to change. So last spring, before the pandemic came out in full force, so I guess it was more like last winter, I was contacted by an individual who had an interest in doing some pollinator surveys on the reservation. And before I could go through all of the main process to get that individual set up with everything, the pandemic happened. And so because that has been such a challenge to all of our communities and disrupted a lot of our plans, we're still trying to figure out how we can make things work. But hopefully we will be returning back to work within the next couple months. And not that we haven't been working this whole time, because we have. It's been a crazy day for me. But those types of opportunities I would love to encourage and help foster and grow. And we will be actually advertising some position vacancies that we have as well. So folks can always check the tribal website for, like, if they're looking for actual employment besides just having some spare time. That would be great too.
Is there anything you'd like to sort of close with or add?
I just really appreciate everyone hanging out, staying so long, putting up with the weird faces I make when I'm trying to figure out the presentation slideshow. I really appreciate the opportunity to meet you all virtually, and hopefully someday soon we'll be able to meet in person as well.
Well, thank you. There's a lot of gratitude expressed in the chat box for the level of detail that you've shared and the education that you've brought to everyone tonight. So thank you.
Excellent.
All right. Good night, everyone. Thanks for joining us.